Welcome to you two. Great to be here. I tell you, you could fill a whole show with the Western Bulldogs on their own. As it is, their equation is simple. They need to win. They need to beat Geelong in Geelong for the first time in 2 decades, and then hope GWS can roll Carlton at Marvel Stadium a day later to feature in finals. They won 4 of 12 in the back end of the season, Gerard.
Are they playing Geelong or Geelong Light?
They're about to be given the best chance, maybe ever, certainly in recent memory, of beating the Cats down there, because the Cats are about to put the biggest queue in the biggest rack you've ever seen. Jeremy Cameron, my understanding, will not play the final game of the year. In fact, he's set for surgery on that shoulder injury we told you that he caught way back in round 15 when he was on the receiving end of that friendly fire from Gary Rowan and was, of course, concussed. His partner in crime, Tom Hawkins, I believe, will also miss this game, having been bothered by a hamstring of late as well and bothered in that game at the weekend. I think you can put a line through him. I think there's a few surgeries booked in as well. And even though they're not playing at the moment, Gary Rowan, Mark Blitzars will be put under the knife as well. So this is Geelong saying nothing to be gained now. Put the queue in the rack. Yep. Get started for 2024. It might just help out the Western Bulldogs, the biggest get-out-of-jail-free card potentially you've ever seen. But they've got to live up to their end of the bargain.
They did just lose to West Coast.
They did indeed.
And Hawthorn.
There is that. There is that. Adelaide have vowed to push the AFL for compensation in the wake of the goal umpire horror show that cost them a potential finals berth of the weekend. So Crows CEO Tim Silver's described it as the biggest match day error he'd seen. Premier Peter Malinowskis weighed in, calling it a shocker and hard to cop. And as you're about to hear, the chairman and the former Premier of the state of South Australia, John Olsen, said he would be pushing for the league for a few favours next year. So this year, Adelaide travelled to 5 states. They also played in the Northern Territory. So one of their Victorian visits was to Ballarat as well. So is there scope in the fixture perhaps get a little bit of a tickle back the other way? Doesn't need to be trumpeted. Don't need to be press conferences or the like. And are they deserving of something?
Has it ever happened before?
Well, you
you
don't have to be a raging cynic.
I remember Josh Jenkins hitting the post.
Yeah.
And
I reckon it's happened
counted
before.
as a goal. And
I reckon
that may have cost another South Australian team a spot in the finals. I don't know if there was any combo for that. No,
never been publicly
not
demanded.
Officially. Not officially. And never publicly demanded like that, no. So if you're a cynic, you'd say maybe that was on the cards anyway. But then to have the chairman make what would appear to be a formal approach to the league for some sort of redress, as he says, or compensation, is certainly watch this space. Richmond's Tyler Sonsie, for those who saw this over the weekend in the VFL, a really nasty incident, straight out of another era, that hit on North Melbourne's Tom Capillari. He's been sent straight to the VFL tribunal. Now, it's been graded as intentional, severe and high contact. And at this level, that's a base sanction of 5 matches plus. So Tyler Sonsie won't be playing AFL football at the start of 2024, that's for sure.
Can I ask you, did the umpire on the ground at the time, did he see it?
I don't know the answer to that. It was well off the ball, obviously. He's near the boundary line and he's punched him square in the jaw. I would assume no.
Because this, Kane, is one of the reasons I'm a great advocate for the send-off rule. It's something that the CEO-elect needs to address. I know it's never going to happen while Gill's here. But if that happened on an AFL ground, you've got no right to stay on the ground.
That was a send-offable offence.
Absolutely, it was.
100%. It was a punch well and truly off the ball. It's
just a king hit.
I'm with you on that one. The landscape at the Dogs.
Yeah, it took another turn, didn't it? The assistant coaching space, which is ever fascinating at the Whitten Oval, announced early this month, of course, that the long-time assistant Rowan Smith would move on at the end of the year. Now, Luke Beveridge wanted Rowan Smith to stay, but it was the top brass, including Amit Baines, the CEO, Chris Grant as well, deciding that change was needed in this space. And by virtue of the fact that Rowan Smith had been there for so long, he'd been an assistant there since 2012, in charge of the defensive unit during that 2016 premiership run as well. Perhaps he was the easiest decision to make for fresh faces, and I think he won't be the last either. I think there'll be more to come in this space.
It's an interesting decision when the CEO gets involved in telling you who should be your assistant coach.
Well, I think so. And you go back over time, so the guys that they've lost in this space, not that they've been moved on, but they've been poached. So Stephen King, you think, Ash Hansen, you think, Joel Corey, Gene Syracuse are all poached. Some of them at the last minute as well, has made this a bit of a revolving door at Luke Beveridge's disposal. So they moved on Chris Maple as well. So clearly there's an awareness that they need to put a team or a rejuvenated team around Luke Beveridge going forward.
All right, so they're going to back the coach in by the sounds and do a 2016 Richmond style, get rid of everyone else to support the coach. There was, just before we get to Hodgie, an arrest with the Jack Zeeble incident, thank goodness.
Yep, Vic Police put out a statement moments ago. 2 men have been arrested following that alleged assault. Now, Victoria Police police saying it'll be alleged the victim, which as we know is Jack Ziebell, was punched in the face, causing him to fall onto the road before he was allegedly kicked while on the ground. Following the alleged assault, the 32-year-old was taken to the Epworth Hospital with facial injury. So this all happened Commercial Road, 1 a.m. Sunday morning just gone.
And this time next week, will Adam Simpson be the West Coast coach?
I would have thought not. They did meet this morning, the board, at the home of Paul Fitzpatrick, the chairman. Maybe the win bought him a stay of execution for a period of time. The statement coming out from West Coast today, Kane, that the club remains firm, they say, on its position that no decisions have been made around the future of any staff members, and none of those decisions will be made until after the season.
He got a nice endorsement from his player after the game. Can't quite remember who it was. It was kick 5 goals.
Jamie Cripps.
Jamie Cripps gave him a rep. In fact, I spoke to a couple of St Kilda supporters today. He was picked 14 or 15 for the Saints and then went home. They said it's the first time he's ever delivered for the Saints.
They put out an excellent Instagram post up or a social media post, the Saints on Jamie Cripps, because, of course, that guaranteed them the finals. Had him in a Saints Guernsey and it said, forever a Saints hero. That was what they said about that. I thought it was quite amusing. Anyway, let's get to the Hawthorn champion. Hodgie, why don't you give us your thoughts on goal umpire-gate?
Look, first of all, you feel for the goal umpire. I know he made a mistake. Everyone's prone to making mistakes, but he was thrown under the bus, saying he's been dropped. He won't be umpiring again this year. I thought that was a bit harsh from the AFL to go out there, and AFL have always been really good at protecting the umpires and saying where they've done the right or wrong that will stick by them. It felt like on this case that they did not do that. But as far as the rest of it, you can understand the frustration from Adelaide. And all I heard today was, why didn't they review it? Why didn't they review it? Well, it's not in the rules to review a point. The umpire felt that he had hit the post, and you got to take the umpire's word for it. That's my feel. Was it a mistake? Yes. Is it costly? Extremely costly for Adelaide. But in his mind, he thought it hit the post. If it had called it a goal and it hit the post, I'd go back and review it. But that's unfortunate. This is the system that we have. Will they make tweaks to it next year? I reckon they probably will after what we've seen. But unfortunately for Adelaide, they can't do much about it now.
What sort of tweaks?
Yeah, what's the
Gil
fix?
said there'd be no review, but there has to be a review.
Yeah, a lot of people saying, well, why didn't they just review it and then stop the game? But that's in our game. It's a flow on. Sydney picked the ball up. They got it straight back in. They wanted to run the clock down. So people were sort of saying, are they? If it is a goal, can they go back, put the clock back to what it was when City kicked it back in and take it to the centre bounce and go it that way? But it's not an easy fix because our game, as soon as we call for a review and it takes longer than 5 seconds, we're impatient people. We want it to be done then and there. And this is what I'm sitting there going, well, what can they do? Who knows? But the anger from Adelaide, they don't want this to happen to any other club because what they're feeling right now, their season's over. Benny Keys kicked the goal, it went through, they should have been in front. Anything could have happened in that last minute. But unfortunately for Adelaide, that's irrelevant now.
All right. Before we get back to more of your observations, Sammy, the match review findings are in.
Just come in. Elliott wasn't going to play anyway because he's got a little hamstring nick. The coach, Adam Simpson, said as it was, he's been offered a one-match ban anyway. Rough conduct against Jackson McRae, careless medium high. Taylor Giray at the Western Bulldogs as well. Rough conduct, offered a one-match ban as well, Kane. That was against Jamie Cripps in the fourth quarter of that game. Fine for Zach Butters and a fine for Hayden Young of Fremantle.
All right. Hodgie, you want to move on to the Blues and their slow start?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, if the Blues expect to rock up in finals in September and play what they did in that first quarter, that they're going to be sent home pretty quickly. That was as laconic a first quarter that I've seen. That they're the hot team at the moment. But how they rocked up in the Gold Coast thinking that they were just going to get it done. If it wasn't for Charlie Curnow, they would be in all sorts and would have went back to Victoria with egg on their face. But in finals, you need to get off to good starts, and that's something that Carlton haven't been doing this year. They've won 9 first quarters. They're 9-12 in first quarters this year, and that's not going to cut it. They've had a really good second quarter, but what we saw in the first quarter, their intensity, their attack on the ball, some of the things, that's not a final side, so they'll need to be focusing on that. From after that second quarter, they improved it, but that first quarter was embarrassing for them.
The heat up there, Hodgie, we've all had experience of playing up on the Gold Coast in the middle of the day, particularly in August, where August is a hell of a different environment to a Melbourne August. You can get some seriously hot days, and the heat shock is palpable. And it took them a long time. In fact, sometimes it takes for the sun to half go down behind the grandstand to allow players to get themselves going again.
Have you had a few Carlton supporters try and get you to look after them there, Gerard? The fatigue hit you in the last quarter, and after quarter time, they were fine. Their second quarter was amazing. They finished off the game in a real tug of war. It didn't look like the heat affected them. If it's a hot day, there's no excuse for not tackling. It's no excuse for not winning the 50-50 balls. It's no excuse for a team that's a lot more inexperienced.
I know it's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse, but it's a reality that they're just not used to. Players aren't used to playing in 23, 24 degrees when they've come off 14 degrees, and I think it's a shock to the system.
A shock to the system, but you still should be able to tackle the opponent. They got walk past as if they were.
Yep. They looked like Essendon for the whole match.
They look like Essendon for the last 6 weeks. But that's what I'm saying. And this is more. Look, they got the win. They went up there to play a game of football and get the win. That's what they did. But they need to have a focus on that first quarter. Being a poorly started, I think they're the fourth worst first quarter team of the whole league. And if you're going to try and come into a final series playing the football they have, you can't give a top 8 team a start like that and expect to continue through the final series.
They owe a lot to Charlie Curnow. Hodgie, his second quarter with 4 goals. There was a goal assist. I was really impressed by his leadership, and leadership isn't something that I've associated with Charlie Curnow before. Is there an area that can be explored there? I'm not sure whether it's captaincy when Cripps has had enough. I thought that was Walsh, but I mean, how influential can this guy be? And he's one player I can't wait to see in September.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at blokes that will stand up when you need it, Toby Green comes straight to mind when you think when GWS needs something, Toby's the man to do it. And look, Carlton were in all sorts until Curnow put his hand up. That fourth quarter was amazing. 4 goals, set another one up. If it wasn't for him, they were in all sorts. But then the leadership, and I don't think Sam, you'd probably know better than what you've watched Carlton a lot more. Him dropping behind the ball, it's not normally him. He's not normally the man to be able to go back and be the hero there.
No, and I like the kick when it was coming out of the back pocket from Jack Martin, which Charlie was going to go to try and mark. He said, I'm going to check out of this one. I'm going to go back on the assumption it's going to come straight back in, and it did, and he marked it in the defensive goal square.
Kane, you were pretty hard on Simo a few weeks ago when they were up against Essendon. They didn't put someone behind the ball. If you're coaching the Gold Coast Suns and Curnow goes behind the ball as the spares, the 7th defender, would you leave a bloke who is that good of a contested marker, can set it up? Would you just leave him sit there by yourself, or would you send Collins around to man him up and try and create a contest?
Yeah, what I think I would do is get your forwards to round him up, and his direct opponent, I'd get them to go very dangerous. So whether that's on the edge of 50 or whether that's in a dangerous hole sort of 45 metres out, and kick the ball along the ground. Don't kick it up because you know they've got extra numbers back there, and get a bit more dangerous that way. That's what I think I would do. There's no point going with him and putting another number there because the likelihood of him marking it is not great. But your forward's got to compete, bring the ball to ground, and his direct opponent's got to get dangerous.
The science of holding a run on and saving a game, I think, is almost unproven. I know the Curnow one worked beautifully, but the Swans had blokes behind the ball as well, and it didn't really work because ultimately they conceded enough. And they kept kicking the ball to the half back line or the wing, and where the numbers should be, and they just kept coming straight back over their head.
I think that's because you have to train it. It's all players have to do it at training time and time again, so you can deliver it when you really need to. And I think that showed that on Saturday that Gold Coast haven't had much training in that situation because very rarely teams have had to put a spare behind to try and save the game against them. But it just shows that that's probably another phase that Dimmer's going to add to that side is teaching them the understanding of the game and when to do it and why they're doing it. Because as soon as I saw Curnow go behind the football with a minute to go, I'm not sure what Collins is doing outside the other end. He's not going to have any impact. You might as well lose by 8 points rather than not have a chance of winning it. He should have been pushed straight in there to man Curnow up. So at least that way brings the ball to ground. You might get one of your crummers there to have a shot on goal.
What about the Sydney experience versus Adelaide? Adelaide were coming. They kicked first 2 goals in about 50 seconds. What should they have done differently to what they did do, which was essentially just not attack?
That's the hardest because when you get a team, Adelaide is a team that can score quickly. It's shown against a lot of quality opposition that when they do get a run on, they can score. They've got smart forwards, they've got quick forwards, and their midfield can win contested football and get it in there. But Sydney, if you've got numbers behind the ball, you need to utilise those spare blokes. No point having numbers behind the blokes and then just still kick it long to the Adelaide out numbers because more often than not it's going to come back into you. So that's probably another phase of Sydney's development where if they are under the pump, utilise the spare. Make sure that Adelaide have to man you up. he can hit that spare bloke, and then you can try and transition the ball out that way.
I thought Jordan Dawson's leadership, after having a quiet game, he was really well held, I think, by Mills. But to burst to his best form after three-quarter time and almost deliver the victory was superb.
Yeah, he's had a huge year.
You can see why Adelaide chased him. He was when they went after him so hard, and then to make him captain after being there for a year, I think it says a lot about him and what they think. And he's just continued to grow in confidence, and they're reaping the rewards.
Not only did they chase him, but they also turned him into a big-bodied mid. Which he'd never done. It made him captain, which had never been done in the Harbour City.
Oh, it's one of the great recruits. They had some ripping recruits over their short history, the Crows, Darren Jarman, and if you want to chuck McLeod in there and Scotty Thompson. But by the end of it, he's going to be right up there. Eddie Betts, of course, but the influence that he has had is significant. We touched on Dimmer quickly, Hodgie, but obviously there's been a link to Dustin Martin. Your advice in that space?
No, you don't go after him. Do you? I know it sounds great, Dimmer going up there and Dusty, but if you've got someone with a hefty pay packet of 1.3 or 1.4 just after you've got yourself out of salary cap issues by getting Bose down to Geelong and giving up a pick 7 to take away 800,000 out of your cap, why do you put yourself in that stress again by bringing in a 32, 33-year-old who's got a massive pay packet, which I think they're not going to win a flag in the next 2 or 3 years. Give it to some other kids. Try and get some other guys that don't be there for the next 8 or 9 years if you've got that space.
Do you think they should have knocked it on the head today?
I don't think you knock anything on the head because you want to sit back and go through the process. And there's no doubt that they might want to go and talk to Dusty and say, well, I know you're on 1.4. Do you want to spread it over a couple of years? And you're not going to knock anything on the head straight away because you want to talk through the powers that be to see their interest. If Dimmer might go back and go, I don't want him to come. I think what we've got here is good enough for what we have moving forward. So I think they've done the smart thing by just cooling their jets without committing or not committing to anything just yet. They're celebrating going after Dimmer, getting Dimmer, signing a long contract for him. I think they'll just take a breath and move through their list over the next couple of weeks.
A few texts coming through. Absolutely spot on, Hodgie, for throwing the umpire under the bus. No wonder they can't get numbers at grassroots level. That was on the back of your observations about the criticism from Gill on the umpire. Any chance we can give the Eagles just a touch of credit for the effort? They've been belted all season. I think there's a couple of ways you can look at that, Hodgie. I mean, where has that effort come from? And how can you produce it one week and be so embarrassing in the others? So I don't know if there is any credit to be given. What's your thoughts?
Is it West Coast or is it the team that they were playing?
I know they were up. They were definitely they were up.
They were up.
The spring was in their step from the first minute. But it does help when you got Elliot Yeo playing like Elliot Yeo and McGovern playing
and Kelly
and Kelly put in a blinder. Yeah.
Does that tease Simo, or does that tease the list management's going, oh, hey, maybe we do have a half-decent list here and we're just through injuries. It's just, if anything, they would have been better off losing by 40 points. They would have still had the number one draft pick. Having a win like that drops them up, takes them one more pick lower down to number 2, gives North a free hit at the first round draft pick, and then it also gives them a little bit of hope that maybe this list has got a little bit of potential with the intensity that we played.
Their ruckman played the best game I've seen him play.
He's a ripper. He's been good all year.
He's developed through the year, hasn't he?
Yeah, no, I like him. It goes to show you just need a competitor. As you in the ruck, you don't need to pay a ruckman massive money, or you certainly don't need to pay 2 of them. You just want an angry competitor. There's a bit of Briggs about the style of ruckman that
a couple of emerging ruckmans. Reeves on the weekend was really good up against high quality and Max.
It was, and it's interesting, the poor game yesterday, Hayes got the better of Jackson. It's certainly not early, but he actually competed okay. So who knows, the ruck landscape will be interesting at the end of the year. Hodgie, how disappointed have you been in Essendon and the way that they've fallen away this season?
Look, yeah, is Mason Redmond sitting here scratching his head going, did I make this call a little bit too early?
Well, he's got to take some responsibility as well, because a couple of his efforts in the contest were deplorable. There was one, dropped a chest mark at centre-half back. There was a high ball against Callum Ward. He didn't want it and Ward did. So whilst he may be thinking that, the Essendon players have to take some responsibility of their performance as well.
How is it that 23 players can be so poor at once, Hodgie? It's almost like the biorhythms just... I mean, I don't go I can't have the tiredness factor. That just doesn't go with me. No, I can't have that.
So the coach put that on the record several weeks ago.
So
it doesn't explain that. But it does
several weeks ago.
Well, come with me on this. So it doesn't explain that result. Don't get me wrong. But is it possible they've just hit the wall? So when a new coach comes in, you guys know, has he wanted to get them from the classroom out onto there was a club under criticism big time for its lack of fitness, Kane. You know that as much as anyone. Did he seek to redress that perhaps more urgently if he had his time over again than what he might have done? Have they just done too much too soon? Have they burn out?
I don't see a burnout factor like
don't you?
that.
They don't look tired to you?
Well, of course they looked lethargic, apathetic. There were all sorts of descriptions you could have thrown at them, but it was one of the worst non-efforts you've seen. And I mean, we saw that from the Giants almost last week, and yet they responded. So I think what Brad Scott will be doing is he'll be just keeping his powder dry and demanding something against Collingwood to finish the season.
What do you think, Hodgie?
But this is resilience. We play in a very physical endurance game.
Yep.
It's a long haul in AFL season, and I know Scotty come out 6 weeks ago and said we look tired, we look fatigued, talking about the length of the season. As soon as your coach has given you an out, what are you going to do? You start. Oh, geez, if Scotty's saying we're looking fatigued, maybe we are. Geez, I'm a bit tired. My back's a bit sore. It's been a long season. We had a good pre-season. All this stuff that starts going into your head. If your coach has given you an out, look at Simo when he came into the hub over in Queensland. He was saying how he hated it. He didn't like it. This is in 2020. West Coast were shocking over here, and it was all down to the mindset. As soon as they went back home and they started playing some decent football, I reckon he's given them a little bit of an out, and the resilience of that group has given up. So if you look at who they've played the last 6 weeks, because we got them Friday night, so I'm looking through some of their numbers, and they have been appalling. Rated number 18 for points against, rated number 17 for points for. Points from turnover, they rated number 18, and they played West Coast and North Melbourne in that 6 weeks. It has been hideous, their form, but their attitude is stacked up there with it.
Hard to argue with any of that. From one disappointment to the next, and the Western Bulldogs are right up there. Clearly they're going to stick by their coach. I'm not sure that's the right move, but what are your thoughts on the way this season's played out for them?
Tell you what, I did say at the start that it was really happy up here. This is making me feel. I understand what the frustration of Western Bulldogs. Once you sort of dive in.
How can a team?
You're not sacking the coach.
What do you mean?
You're not sacking the coach. They could still play finals. You're going to sack him.
100. What is? You don't think he's done?
Do you think he's the sole problem?
Yes.
Really?
How could you not?
Because he's a proven coach.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
They made a grand final not long ago.
Yeah, and how'd that go for them? How'd last year's final
that happens.
go for them? So explain to me how a list with the players that they've got in there has produced 2 seasons like they've produced this year, and what sort of an ambassador he's been for the club.
So you sack him?
Yes.
Right.
And I don't get to that decision lightly at all.
Get angry, Hodgie. You've got to get angry.
Go as far as that. No, I'm looking through at their last. Once again, I sort of like to do current form, not so much the whole season, but their last 6 weeks. If their confidence is up and they're flying, they belt teams. So they've beaten Essendon by 41 points. They've beaten Richmond, who pretty much checked out, by 55. The other 4 games in the last 6 weeks, they've lost by 2 points to Sydney, lost by 5 points to GWS, lost by 3 points to the Hawks, lost by 7 points to West Coast. When push comes to shove, are the players standing up? Is it all on Bevo when if they're good enough to get into a close situation, do the players fold? Is that more so to look at that than rather than Bevo? Or has he not taught them the right way to compose himself in pressure situations? Because if you lose so many close games, it means that you're in the game, so you're skillful enough to be in there. But you've just panicked and not done enough things right, which has cost yourself the game.
They lost to Collingwood by 2 goals when they were the best team in it. They were flying.
Tell me who they've beaten.
They lost to Port Adelaide when that Waitman goal to put them within a kick with minutes left. Baker got called for that free kick on the goal line, which was, as we said, just never happens. They lost to the Giants by 5 in Ballarat when both key defenders went down and missed a half, and Toby Green bobs up and kicks 5. They lost to Sydney at the SCG when Darcy and O'Donnell went down in the first quarter. The man down, no backup ruck. So there's context and all that. Now, you can say they're excuses or you can say that they're facts, but if you look within every one of these losses, there generally is a good reason that what I'm saying is you can't sheet it all home to the coach in that situation.
Well, I think you can. When you have a list as good as that, and the club, by their own admission, has a top 4 list, and you are losing to West Coast and Hawthorn in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, they deserve criticism.
They've had the 14th easiest draw. They don't defend, and they haven't defended since 2016. They concede more run-on goals than any team in the league. Only North Melbourne and West Coast concede more runs of 5 goals or more. They have midfield dominance that they never parlay into scores. They lose close games. The public messaging from the club has been awful at times, including the coach having cracks at journalists repeatedly, having cracks at opposition players, bizarre behaviour, strange selection calls. There's so many things building up that have been there for such a long time. Now, the club can bury their head in the sand and all of that, but he's been unbelievable for them. Put a statue of him up at the Whitten Oval, but the time is to get someone in who can maximise the list that they've got. And that time is at the end of the season now.
Jared?
Well, I probably agree more with you, but I mean, there's elements of what Kane's saying is true. But you've signed him up as a 2-year deal. He's a premiership coach. 3 weeks ago, I did an editorial saying the Dogs are coming. I mean, this is what frustrates me about that group. And so I think, as Hodgie says, there's got to be some responsibility from some playing group because the gap between their best and their worst is like a canyon.
Well, they can look amazing because of the list they've got. When Hugo Hagen's flying, when Norton, when English, when Bont, when Libber, when Richards, when Jones. Honestly, imagine if Ross had this list or what Ken Hinkley's had to deal with this year or what Sam Mitchell's doing with what he's got versus what they're producing with that. I just can't get my head around it. Now, they'll go again. We'll get to round 10 next year and you watch it flame out. Talk to me about the Geelong Footy Club, Hodgie.
It's angry round.
I was going to say, Kane definitely is
It
building
just
up
does
his anger.
it does my head in.
Surely when they do have a decent excuse with their defenders that they've had a lot of. So as far as giving him the boot, I'm not strong on that one. But they do need to explain a lot of their losses, whether it's players or coaches or they don't understand the game, Kane. But I wouldn't go as far as sacking him. I'll jump to the Cats. Is it time where they've finally put the queue in the rack? Like they've been up for so long, Geelong.
When you say put the queue in the rack, expand.
They're allowed to have a down year. Sale had left.
So what about the strategy next year? What is it? A mini reset? Is it go all in again? Like what should the strategy be?
I thought they started with their mini reset when they went after Braun and got Bose and all that last year to try and get a bit of youth. And there's no way that they were going to live up to the expectations of a Selwood. And Paddy Dangerfield had an injury-prone year. We had
no Guthrie.
Duncan didn't really do a pre-season either. So I wouldn't be throwing everything out. Cameron's still got a lot of life in him. Hawkins is still playing decent football. If they can help develop these younger guys, who's to say they can't go again next year? If you go back week in, week out, year in, year out, going deep into September, that's going to take a fair ride on you. And for these players here, maybe it just might be the year where they go, we're out for this year, and then let's rebuild, a couple extra weeks off, solid pre-season, and let's go again.
Whilst Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron are playing near enough to their best, you've got to say they're still in the premiership.
I'm with you. They've got the best list management department in the game, so I would back them in to go again. Now it's not easy, and they're going to do what no other club that's had as much success, and you'd know that better than anyone, Hodgie. But you'd back them in to go again.
But that's the thing and they continually get people want to go down there.
No, biggest destination club in the comp, and that won't change.
And all of a sudden, Bailey Smith's now. Look, and they're talking that he's strong to head down that way to get away from Melbourne.
There's another one from the Dogs that I didn't.
It's been offshore there for about 2 months, so they get a lot of interest from blokes who like having wax underneath their fingernails. But there was some really good vision last night on First Crack that Joey Montagna, I think, showed about Sam de Koning. He's been one who's pulled back a fair notch, but he's also a very talented player. So next year he will come again. And he's a young guy who probably hasn't stood up to...
Who are they losing? Oh, not many.
Well, probably only Esav.
They need to address the ruck as well.
Isaac Smith's going to go.
And Isaac
got a decision to make on Duncan, I would have thought, whether he goes again. I just think their back line is a bit suspect. I don't have a lot of confidence in Buse and Kolodjasny and Radaglia who will leave and the like. So that's been exposed a bit as well.
Will they chase Grundy? How hard will they go Grundy? Or is Grundy
pretty hard,
is Port going to be looking at Grundy?
Well, Sydney, Port and Geelong would be the three.
Sean Darcy's been the other ruckman that they're absolutely interested in as well. Now that's more of a long term, but they've got a young fella on the list down there. They've got
love him.
Big raps for as well that hasn't debuted yet, but they reckon could be something.
Can you see a swap of Bailey Smith and Radaglia through the Dogs?
I think the Western Bulldogs would want a bit more compensation.
No, I don't mean a direct swap, but some sort of trade.
Perhaps. I think Port Adelaide have sort of got that one over the line as much as I'm going. I don't know if he's the right guy with the way that I've seen him.
Who else has offered him a 5-year deal? There's another club out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Brown and gold.
Have they?
For Asava?
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hawthorn into Asava. Yeah, for sure. Just exactly who are the premiership favourites at the moment?
Toss a coin. Toss a coin. You sort of sit back and you look at the last Friday night's game was supposed to be 1v2, and then you go through their previous month record and you sort of look through their stats, and the form line was 5th and 12th. I think the Lions' form line was 5th and the Collingwood's was 12th. And then you look at this week coming up. Very rarely you come to this stage of the season, you go, who really is the favourite? But I'm looking at Melbourne. I think Melbourne's a little sneaky there. They've had some issues with their forward connection. Oliver's back in there now. I think they play better football with Gawn solely rucking. He had a little bit of a rest last week with Grundy coming in to share it out. But Collingwood aren't going great. Melbourne finished 4th, play Collingwood at home at the G in the first final. They win. They're through to a prelim. They don't have to travel. This could be lining up quite nicely for Melbourne to finish 4th, and they'd almost be favourites going into a first final if they match Collingwood at the MCG.
What do Collingwood do this week, Hodgie? Because they've got one more crack at getting their system, their hunger, whatever it is that ails them. I know they've got some blokes out, but they've got one more crack.
Yeah, I don't think their hunger's left them. I think they've been hit with injuries to key personnel. And you always say that you need a squad to win premierships or a squad to win big finals, and you do. But when you're getting hit with Dacos, DeGoey, Moore, and then Murphy, who was supposed to be taken over for Moore, I reckon they look a little bit fragile as their key position with Howe playing up forward. Their two main defenders, their two main big defenders was Frampton and Murphy, and I don't think that's going to get it done against other top 8 teams when they come into it.
Do you see any chance that Essendon beats them on Friday night?
No.
So, Hodgie, you've played in dominant teams. Well, hang on, when there's nothing to play for at the back end. So he used the phrase after the game, Craig McRae, probably for the first time he tiptoed into this space, almost by accident when discussing the hunger that they've discovered in Mason Cox, who we'll get to in a moment. But he used the term biding time and the challenge with that. So you don't think there's anything in that, even subconsciously with the players, with no carrot?
I know, because I think they know that they need to play better football, and I think the biding time comment may have just accidentally slipped out. But he's probably sitting there going, "Can we?" I definitely think putting Mason Cox as a sub was trying to tweak to see can we pull something out of a hat later in the season to try and give us that added advantage in September. A lot of teams, once they've locked away a spot, will look to do that. But I think the form that they've had of late has been purely down to their injuries, having those dominant players being missing for them.
Last 6 weeks, Hodgie, points from their defensive half, they're ranked first. Points from their forward half, as in turnovers in the forward half game, they're ranked 16th in the competition. I mean, that is just not going to get it done in a grand final.
No, and to follow with that, the last 6 weeks they're ranked 15 for points against. So this is a team who you could hardly score early in the year, but the last 4 weeks they've given up 100 points. And this is not the form line that you want when you're sitting on top of the ladder. I know they get a second chance and they've done extremely well to be sitting on top of the ladder, but you don't want to be giving up that much score flowing into a big final series.
It's not a coincidence that Collingwood are struggling without Nick Dacos. A simple message off the Temper text machine, 0433 98 11 16. So just on Collingwood, Mason Cox, the riddle that is Mason Cox, Darcy Cameron, the big man at Collingwood, who rucks. What do you make of the performance from Mason, which did catch the eye, Hodgie, and what sort of standing does it have him in pre-finals?
Well, he turned the game on Friday night. That third quarter, he had 16 hit-outs for the quarter. He had 7 to the advantage of his teammates. But what he also did is he brought Scotty Pendlebury back into the game. Scotty had 10 disposals in the third and had 4 clearances. Without Cox coming in and having an impact, I don't think they even got back into the game. So I think they were 28 points down, got down to 3 or 4 points midway through the third, and then the Lions were able to balance and kick a couple goals and then run away with it. But where's that hunger been? He came on like a new player. He was dominant. He was hitting big contests. And Oscar McInerney's a really good ruckman. He's been the number 1 ruckman for the Lions for a number of years. But tell you what, Cox was sensational on Friday night in that third quarter. And they're silly. If they don't lead with him this week, he has to have the same hunger, whether he starts or comes in off the bench as well.
Well, what we saw, the Mason Cox we saw in the third quarter was the Mason Cox that can lead them to a flag. I mean, and it may well make him as the first ruckman. I mean, that's the challenge for him. If they're going to stay with McStay, then he's the one who has to force the hand of the coach and put him in the ruck. There's a really interesting text here, Hodgie, and it goes to umpiring. It goes to results, if you like, but it goes to rules that come in and out of favour. Last time that the Giants played Carlton, there was a dissent call on Cornelio. How's that looking now? Massive impact on finals, just like the goal umpire error. And this is I think we take it too lightly, just the impact that some of these calls do make that go in and out of favour.
Yeah, I think with the dissent stuff, it reared its head back up a few weeks ago, but common sense has come back. And I think we understand what's right and wrong. But yeah, it's true. You look back at a lot of these games, you don't want games to be won or lost through umpires' calls. You want it to be the better team win on the day. And unfortunately, when you look back at things, there has been a few that have upset the score and had a real impact.
Gee, that was a big call, wasn't it? So the Giants would be safe by now if they won that game, obviously.
Yeah, and the Blues would be, you'd be still nervous.
In the hot seat.
Can I just make a point about the Dogs? I know Kane ripped through them, but there was one absolute positive for me, and that was young Jimmy O'Donnell.
Yep.
He was superb. And you just add that potentially an up-and-coming centre-half back to that group. They've got some their future. Their present is really wobbly, but their future, it just looks as if they've got all the posts ticked.
But that if you look through at face value, the Bulldogs, they've actually got some really good defenders in there.
Yeah.
But they just haven't been able to. Some of you mentioned it before, that they just haven't been able to get him on the park.
No.
Between Jones with his injuries, between Keith getting knocked out. I did the game down at Ballarat when Bruce did his knee, Keith got knocked out, and the game turned from being 30 points up to losing by 5. They haven't had the rub of the green with the injuries to their key defenders as well.
And it is a bit of coulda, shoulda, woulda, isn't it? But they would have. He's just a kid, but they would have wanted to see a lot more of Sam Darcy this year as well. It just hasn't been able to take a trick since he started there as well. So all that goes into the mix, I think. But I wouldn't change Kane for the world. Love him when he's in that sort of form. It is anger around Gerard, as you said. West Coast. I don't know if it's a stay of execution or something extraordinary is going to happen going forward for Adam Simpson, but a statement today from the Eagles, Gerard and Hodge, that no decision, reaffirming the fact that no decision will be made until season's end. There was a meeting at the home of the private residence of the chairman today, but no decision has been made.
Well, the chairman has been a huge supporter of the coach. I think up until the 100-point loss against Fremantle, I reckon he was going to coach. I'm not sure what transpired last week, but it's fair to say that the confidence levels diminished dramatically. But to come out now and play that sort of football, albeit with McGovern turning it on like we know McGovern can turn
he
on.
went back with the flop. Was that the first quarter against Jamari Gulagan?
It was incredible. But he's just he turns them into a good, not a great side, but that distribution from the half-back line, Hodgie, is as good as any half-back that I've seen. He can hit targets, he intercepts, he's been one of the great defenders of the modern era.
Yeah, that's always good when you got a half-back who can use the ball like that. But, Sammy, just touch on what you said. Do you reckon that they've made the decision, they're just holding off till the end of the season so there's not an embarrassment for Simo with the game to go? Do you think it's been done, paper stamped?
No, I'm not saying that. I think it was definitely moving that way. I think there'd been a real shift from backing in Adam Simpson going forward as almost the designated survivor. I think there was going to be changes all around Adam Simpson, and he was going to be the one that remained. He's wanted to always remain. But there's been a change. There's certainly been a mood shift late in the season over there. But then off the back of a win, what does that do? They've felt the need still the board to meet at the home of Paul Fitzpatrick. So they've still felt the need to do that. I just thought it might have fit in nicely if they were to go down that path of saying thanks, we'll bid you farewell, with the retirements and the farewell that's going to take place at Optus Stadium. It's not to be this weekend.
Very rarely if a coach gets sacked that he's going to stay around and coach one more last game.
I thought he might have, though.
Thank you.
Well, I thought in this case he might have done, given he's been so, I don't know, mature all the way through and so composed, Adam Simpson, and the success that they've had over a long period of time. I thought if there was going to be any coach who decided to hang around, it might have been him. But, yeah, maybe I'm naive to the fact.
Even he's starting to comment on it a little bit more than what he has in the past. But I just don't understand how, if they do sack him, they had faith after they lost 170 points to Sydney.
Yep.
He came. They support him. They said, "No, Simo's the man for us moving forward." Since then, they've played a lot more convincing football. They've been in a lot more games than what they were prior to that 170 point win. I scratch my head saying, how can things change that much, or how can you lose faith in a coach after you publicly support him, but then after the team improves, the games have been closer, but then it's looking like he's going to get the sack anyway.
Yeah, well, that triple-figure loss to Fremantle, is there a level of losses that just can't be absorbed, though, Gerard? This is the question, isn't it?
Well, I think the answer to that is there is a level, and I think they reached that level. but no one in the whole world saw them beating the Western Bulldogs on the weekend and playing with a tenacity and a ferocity and spirit, Hodgie, that we haven't seen from that group for a fair period of time.
Is that a passing shot from Simo just to get an extra win?
Yeah.
Take off pick number 1. We'll give that to North Melbourne.
It's a square
and I'll
up.
walk out with that.
Surely hard to remove him after that, isn't it? But this is how it sort of came to head. We spoke about it on Crunch Time, is all the movement around who changes in the football department that Adam Simpson wanted to have a say in who came in, and that was when
he was
not getting a say. And when that was communicated to him, that led him to then say, hang on, I need some clarity on my position going forward. So it's all come to a head.
That's concerning. If they're not allowing you to have a say with blokes that you're going to be ultimately in charge of, that's a big red flag.